Hey there, this is the Resistor Vic podcast. I'm here to get folks thinking about politics as something that's really about regular people like you and me, and to realize that together we can make a difference. I'm Vic Myers. Welcome to the Resistance. Today I am talking about the great, not so great gun control debate, and how I think it's time that we start looking at the whole issue of gun violence in a different way. I'm tired after 40 years of the gun control debate. It started in the 1980s, 1981, when Reagan got shot by Hinckley, and he used a .38 special, which was as easy to buy as cigarettes. So there was a big outcry because our national hero, Reagan was still super popular back then, even among a lot of Democrats. And there's a large outcry. Why is it so easy to get these weapons? It's criminal. It shouldn't be like that. 12 years later, we got the Brady Bill, which was background checks and waiting periods. So you couldn't just walk up to the store and buy one. Fast forward to Columbine. I remember exactly where I was when Columbine happened. And I remember exactly that sinking, big, gaping hole feeling I had in my chest as I pulled over and I'm listening to the radio and hearing about what was going on in Columbine. And that was the first real big one in my memory. And I thought, wow, I didn't know what to think, really. I've got my two young sons in the car, and my wife was pregnant with our daughter, and thinking, what kind of world are we bringing them up in? And by then, the gun debate had been going for, 20 years almost, the whole gun control debate, because as soon as somebody said Brady Bill, the NRA changed from being a sport advocacy organization that taught people responsible use of weapons, and it became a arm of the Republican Party. And I used to be a member, and for those who didn't hear me last night, I am a gun owner. I've always been a gun owner. I've got plenty of guns. They're not toys. They're not things that I show off. All of them are either collectors or utility items, tools. I do not have any assault rifles. And if anybody wants to come up in the questions or the comments or whatever and say, what's an assault rifle? Go away. Because anybody who wants to try and use that, you can't even define an assault weapon. If you want to use that argument, you're being an idiot, you're ignorant, or maybe you really don't know the difference between a semi-automatic hunting rifle and an assault weapon. And if you don't know the difference, then you have absolutely no business being around any kind of firearm because you're too damn stupid. So there's my thoughts on that. We do not need assault rifles on our city streets anywhere. Anyway, I got a little bit off track. Because the point is, I'm tired of the gun control debate. 44 years after Reagan was shot and the gun debate started, we haven't seen any progress whatsoever. We're still seeing school shootings. And the one the other day in Minnesota, what got me to bring this topic up finally in my videos, is that when that happened, I'm very sickened to say, I didn't feel a lot. I didn't get that hole in my heart like I did when Sandy Hook happened and Uvalde and Parkland and Columbine. It didn't happen. It was another news day. And that's when I knew I had to finally talk about this subject in my videos. So that's why I'm talking about it today. For those who think that the Second Amendment is sacrosanct, that if you allow any gun law to pass, then it's a slippery slope. Now we've got a president who is on record in his previous, I don't know, was it in the campaign or was it in his previous administration when he was filmed talking to somebody about you take their guns away from them and then worry about going to court later. And now, just yesterday, Trump DOJ is looking at ways to ban transgender Americans from owning guns, sources say. That's not even to me, the canary in the coal mine. To Second Amendment proponents, it probably is. I saw the NRA today came out with a hellfire and brimstone comments about how we will not let this stand, blah, blah, blah. They're not supporting this idea by the administration, which really is, I think, one, just yet another way to try and pick on transgender people. But two, if they can get away with this, it's a starting point. Because they're working on getting rid of our Fifth Amendment right to due process. They're trying to say that the 14th Amendment doesn't exist when it does. They're trying to say that habeas corpus doesn't apply to non-citizens. They're trying to say that the First Amendment is not absolute, even though it says Congress shall make no law restricting people's free speech or restricting a free press, and yet we've got government censors in newsrooms. For now, the point is, these guys are wearing away our rights. They're taking them away. And if you're a Second Amendment proponent and can't see that, I almost feel bad for you, because your Second Amendment right to a firearm is more at risk now than it has ever been under any Democratic president. I remember when the assault weapons ban went through in 1994, I want to say. It was there for 10 years. And, not a single knock on my door. The government never came for any of my weapons. But now, MAGA's hero is openly saying he's going to start coming and taking people's guns. So think about that, Second Amendment people. And on the other side, folks who think that gun control is the solution, that banning guns and rules for locks and all of that stuff is the solution. You couldn't be more wrong, because that would imply that the guns are the problem. Access to guns plays a huge factor in all these shootings. But it's not the biggest factor in my mind. Because the biggest factor in my mind is the sociological changes that have happened from the time that I was a kid until now. It's getting harder and harder and harder for people to survive. People can't afford rent or to purchase a home. They can't afford groceries. They can't afford to go to the doctor. They have to spend more of their life working to live, and they don't have time to spend with their kids. They're under more stress. So when they are at home, they're tired or they're cranky. They don't get to go to the ballpark and watch their kids play. Hell, they probably don't even get to let their kids play, because just to sign a kid up for soccer these days costs over $100 a kid. How are people supposed to enjoy family time when they can't be a family, when they don't have time to be a family, when they can't afford to be a family? That is the problem that we have to solve. If we solve the income inequality problem in this country, if we have a living wage, if we have an economy that works for the working class, that is when we start to see a reduction in violence, not just school shootings, but gun violence and crime in general. That is, in my mind, the biggest driver. And if we solve that, I think we will go far, far closer to solving the gun violence problem. That's one piece. Another big piece is our public education system. I remember the day that I came home and I told my dad that Mr. Martinez was picking on me. And my dad, that son of a gun, you know what he said? He said, "What did you do wrong?" Like, wait a minute. Whoa, wait, time out. You're supposed to back me up. He's like, "I am. That's why I'm asking you what you did wrong." He didn't run to the school and yell at Mr. Martinez for kicking me out of class that day. He asked me what I did to single myself out. What was it about me that drew Mr. Martinez's attention and made him send me out of the class? He made me take responsibility for my actions, that dog. We don't see that anymore, and I can tell you that from experience, because after my 17 years working in the Department of Corrections, I was a teacher for 1 year, just 1 year, because I had cases where students would misbehave, and we'd have a teacher conference, and it was my fault as the teacher. It was always, every single time, my fault that the child misbehaved, or that the child wasn't doing their homework, or that the child just didn't care. It was somehow my fault as the teacher. I'd only been a teacher for a couple of months. We've got to get our public school system back to where it is a central part of our communities. No more of this school of choice crap. Because when you have schools of choice, what you have is cases like the 7th grade girl up in Gardner. I was walking into the class, first class of the morning, and she says, I don't remember exactly what she said. It was just so unbelievably disrespectful that my jaw was on the floor. So I looked at her, I said, "Get out, go to the office, tell Mrs. Levy that you are not in my class today." She left. And before I was done writing the date on the board, on the whiteboard, she was back. I said, "What are you doing?" She called the principal by her first name and said, "She told me to come back." I said, "Well, you go back and you tell Mrs. Levy that you are not in my class, period, for today." Later on that day, we had a conference with her mom, and her mom was just all kinds of angry because she had to drive all the way up there and meet with us. And she literally said that if I couldn't teach her kid without having to disrupt her in her day, then she would just pull her out of that school and take her to another school. And in a day and age where school funding is dependent upon school enrollment, well, every kid counts towards your budget. And they're already under budgeted. So we've got a economy that doesn't work for working people, doesn't allow people to spend time and enjoy time, quality time with their families. And we have a school system that isn't allowed to put any responsibility on kids. We have a school system where we've pretty much cut out the counselors. So we need to resource our schools. We need to make a living economy for families again. When we do that, then we can reduce gun violence. We can reduce crime. We can hopefully stop seeing weekly, sometimes daily news events of school shootings. I mean, they're becoming so common these days. Sometimes I will see a social media post, another one today, and I go to look for it in the news, and I can't find it. CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, I check their websites, there's no mention. I check AP, there's no mention. Sometimes I do a Google search, and the only evidence I find is the local paper. Why do we not hear about them? Why are they not big news anymore? Well, because they're so damn common. It happens so much. And 40 years of the gun control debate has not produced a solution. Not a single solution. We have ideas. We have things that each side believes are solutions. More doors, more locks on the doors, metal detectors. You know what? When you turn your school into a prison, that's not a healthy learning environment. And when you think that simply outlawing the weapons is going to stop, then you've got your head in the sand. So there you have it. I'm going to comment on something else I saw on the news today. I saw the news about Thomas Massie. He's a representative out of Kentucky. As far as I'm concerned, the guy's a real piece of garbage. He helped get Trump elected. And he voted for the big, beautiful bill, or as I call it, the Trump tax. He hasn't done anything worthwhile except that he is trying to get the Epstein list published. He's trying to get it out in the open, unredacted. So good for him for that. And today, he was on, I don't know, one of the right-wing news programs. I saw the video. And he said that he believes the right-wing billionaire who is funding a primary campaign against him may be on the list. So here's my question for the Democratic Party. If Thomas Massie can come out and accuse one of their big funders, because the guy funds lots and lots of Republican campaigns, if a Republican can call out a billionaire on the right, why can the Democrats not call out, or at a minimum reject, money from AIPAC? Why does a piece of garbage Kentucky Republican have more guts than almost the entirety of the Democratic Party in Washington? I only saw it about an hour before I came on here, and now I reckon I'm going to have to do a video about that this weekend. I hope the Second Amendment people are listening. If we don't do something reasonable, if we don't come together with things that most people agree on, most gun owners agree that we don't need assault weapons. Most gun owners are fine with background checks. Most gun owners are fine with the rules that say you have to lock up your weapons. Those are reasonable gun control measures that most gun owners, let alone most of America, would like to see implemented. And if we can't do that, then what's going to happen is we're going to get to a point of saturation. I don't personally know anybody today. Well, that's not true because I met somebody, but Brett Cross, father of Uvalde, I met him down at Texas A&M. Other than him, and I didn't know him before it happened. So I've never known somebody at the time of a school shooting when it happened. I've never known anybody been close enough to somebody to be affected. And now my daughter's a high school teacher, so anytime something like that happens, that's the first thing I think about. But it's only a matter of time, as frequent as they are, and not just school shootings, but any mass shootings, the churches, the Walmarts, the whatever. They're happening so often now that it is only a matter of time before we all know somebody. We are all going to know somebody sooner or later that is affected or lost to one of these mass shootings. And when we get to that point, when the Parkland generation grows up, and by Parkland generation, I'm talking about all the kids of their age, not just the kids from Parkland. When that generation grows up and takes power, the kids who had to suffer through shooting drills from preschool to graduation, and some of them in college, those kids are going to be in power someday. And they're not going to just say, let's have some reasonable gun control laws. They're going to say, we don't really need the Second Amendment. And they're going to have the power to repeal it. Think about that, Second Amendment people. If it's that precious to you, then protect it by being reasonable. Because if you don't, it's going to end up going away. I'm already hearing some of that generation talk about the need to repeal the Second Amendment. And frankly, if we're not going to protect kindergartners from this kind of horror, they won't get any argument from me. I won't be campaigning against them or donating to their political opponents because that's their position. You know, when I ran for Congress in a very rural, very red district, I had a concealed carry permit at the time because of some threats I had when I worked in the prison. I was a gun owner. Like I said, I've always been a gun owner. And when it came to the gun control issue, my point was this. If I had been elected, I would neither sponsor or work for or co-sponsor, whatever, any gun control legislation because my focus was going to be on working families, on protecting Social Security, protecting our veterans, things like that, healthcare. Those were going to be my objectives because even back then, I believed that all these gun control laws, at the end of the day, for the most part, were going to be a waste of time. If I were the president today and somebody gave me, Congress put a bill on my desk to ban assault weapons, I would sign it. But if I were president today, I would not be focused on that as my primary policy objective. I would be focused on a living wage, affordable health care, education systems that worked. Because if we solve those, then the gun violence becomes much less of a problem. And everyone who watched Uvalde, I mean, how anybody can argue that we just need more guns, more armed teachers or armed guards or what have you after Uvalde, I mean, that event totally ended that argument in my mind. For those of you who think that our founders wanted us to have a Second Amendment right to a personal weapon, I got news for you. Up until the 1950s, it was never interpreted in the law as a right, a personal right to carry a weapon or to bear arms, if you will. It was interpreted as a right to bear arms for the purpose of being a part of a well-regulated militia. That was the judicial ruling of hundreds of court cases from 1789 until the 1950s. It was in the 1950s when the the Federalist Society started getting their judges in enough positions and high enough in the court system that we started to see it being interpreted as a individual right to bear arms. The history of the Second Amendment wasn't about individuals. It was about the states protecting themselves from a federal tyranny, which is really ironic because now we've got Trump saying he's going to take federal power into states. And that is exactly what a well-regulated militia was put into the Constitution for, was to protect that from happening. Makes me wonder why Pritzker isn't saying that he is going to activate the National Guard to keep the Tennessee or Oklahoma or whatever National Guard from coming into his state. That would be quite the standoff because there ain't anybody on either side of that line that's going to want to fire at each other. And to be clear, we know that the assault weapons ban significantly reduced mass shootings in this country. And when it expired, the number of mass shootings in this country went crazy high, like 250% increase or something like that. So yes, it does have an effect. But as Brett Cross, the father of a Uvalde victim, would tell you, nobody in their right mind believes that an assault weapons ban is going to stop it. It's going to take us in the right direction. If you have topics that you're interested in having me talk about, whether it be in my 3 to 6 minute videos or for my podcast, send them to resistorvic@gmail.com. RESISTOR And by the way, I'm going to finally get this off my chest. Why hasn't anybody ever bugged me because I spell resistor wrong? It's not really wrong. Resistor, if I am a resistor, a political resistor, then it's RESISTER, right? But I use the RESISTOR as in electrical resistor because that's the kind of resistor that resists power. And there you have it. Next week, I am going to have as my guest Z Cohen Sanchez from the National Ground Game and the Unfuck America Tour. We're going to talk about their next event in Fort Collins, Colorado, that I can't go to because I can't get work off in my own state. And then later this month, I'm going to have Marta Levchenko. She is the person behind the orphanage where the proceeds from the Stand With Ukraine shirts go. She's going to be my guest, and I can't wait for that to happen. I'm super excited. So stay tuned, and thanks again for making me a part of your day. Well, folks, looks like we're back at the barn, and it's time to call it a day. I sure do appreciate you spending your time with me. If you want to help keep this podcast going by supporting me, you can get a paid subscription on Substack, where I'm Resistor Vic. Or if you're the type that'd rather go to PayPal, I'm also resistorvic@gmail.com. Thanks again.